Joseph, welcome to Stories in AI. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you, Ganesh.
And it's a pleasure to have you on the show. And I can't tell you how many requests I've gotten from the audience of the show to get you on the show, like over the last year. So we're a year old, and we focus on AI, but also the peripheries of it. So thanks again. Why don't you kick us off with your personal story? Who is Joseph Sirosh, and what's your background? How did you get to where you are today? And just give us a little color.
Thank you, Ganesh. It's fun to be on this show. So thanks for inviting me. So I'm really an AI geek in some ways, right? So I got a PhD in neural networks when neural networks were just getting exciting in the 90s, before machine learning came in with support vector machines and,
Yep.
took away all that neural network audience away in one way. And then, of course, we've had a resurgence. So
Resurgence of
my
deep learning, yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. My very first job after my PhD was at a company called Agency Software, which was doing credit card fraud detection using
Mm.
neural networks. Remember, AI has been mostly driven by the data of that time. So at that time in the 90s, the high quality data that was exploding was financial transaction data, like credit card transaction data. And there was a lot of opportunity to apply machine learning or neural networks to
Yep.
help do things like credit card fraud detection or bankruptcy prediction in real time. So that was my first job. And I was a data scientist. I was
And
building.
you're a Longhorn before that, right? You did your
I was a
PhD.
Longhorn at UT, right? And my,
Right.
at that
Okay, I
time,
got
my
my
PhD was in representation learning, really
there you go.
representation learning in the visual cortex. And, I was learning, for example, lateral connections in the visual cortex, which are like attention mechanisms,
Yeah.
right? So you were learning the attention weights as well as the receptive fields of the visual cortex. So it was very exciting. But and then when you went to the industry, the applications were all in financial services.
Yep.
I spent about 9 years there, and at that time it was very creative at this company called Agency Software. We did DARPA projects. In 2000, for example, we did a project on biowarfare detection, which was really
Wow.
detecting, minimally mutating and maximally conserved sequences in DNA, so that you could use those as diagnostic kits. So the
Yeah.
PCR was just emerging, and you could
Yeah.
put these snippets on microarrays, and you could do diagnostics, see what viruses or bacteria were infecting you. So it's sort of this. We are talking 22 years ago almost. So we had
Amazing.
a DARPA program for that, and there we were applying tools like probabilistic context-free grammars to detect the signature sequences. Really fun work. I then went on to Amazon in 2004. I was hired to build the trust and safety at scale in Amazon for fraud detection,
Fraud
for
detection.
trust and safety in the seller platform. I was affectionately called the first VP of fraud prevention or fraud at Amazon. Um, Anyway, so then I had a fun 9 years at Amazon. And towards the end, I was very passionate about machine learning and the cloud. And the cloud was just emerging. And it felt like if you could have machine learning APIs in the cloud, well, then you had this opportunity to make every software application intelligent.
Yeah.
And so that was a dream. And Satya Nadella at that time, this is before he became CEO, he was actively recruiting. And I ended up joining him, reporting to him, building Azure machine learning. That was my passion project.
That's amazing.
Then I ended up, it was very exciting. And the goal was to be able to deploy machine learning models as APIs with one click. So REST APIs. This was even before things like AWS Lambda was there. So
Yep.
could you create one-click ways of putting models and associated variable computations into REST APIs, and then APIs could be called from software application. And that was really exciting. I then went on to run SQL Server, big data, machine learning, a lot of these things together. And then I was briefly the CTO of AI at Microsoft. And then I encountered another passion project, which was building platforms in industries. So we were seeing platforms like Airbnb and
Yep.
Uber, and it felt like the next 10 years would be all about industry transformation with platforms. And so I joined Compass, and being the CTO, building a platform for real estate transactions end to end. If you could build a SaaS platform that handled real estate transactions end to end, in this case, the customers were agents, like drivers are customers for Uber,
Yeah.
hosts are customers for Airbnb. The same way customers here were real estate agents, and built that out. The company went IPO in 2021 April, and so it was a great 3.5 year journey. So I'm actually now going towards another exciting opportunity. So we'll see how
Soon to
that
be
shapes up.
announced. Yeah, no, it's
So to
pretty
be announced.
amazing.
Yes.
It's pretty amazing, that background and that common thread around how you started off with, like, transactions and transaction processing, and then going into machine learning and realizing cloud will be that actuator to get machine learning happen at scale. And it's
Yes.
fascinating. I mean, if you think about, if cloud computing didn't happen, machine learning would still be in the research labs, and most of the data science and machine learning folks will be spending time building infrastructure so you can test your hypothesis better, right? So it really unlocked that whole value. And it's interesting, this whole notion of platforms, industry platforms, as you said, right? And I would love to get a little bit deeper on, like, the Compass work that you guys did. I mean, completely revolutionized real estate, and there's now a lot of different players who are also trying to do, and not to mention Zillow tried its own version of it, and didn't really work out the way it is. But talk to me a little bit about it before we go into AI as a thing. But this notion of industry platforms,
Mhm.
why is it relevant for industries to have a platform at the industry level? Why can, like Amazon or AWS or Microsoft's Azure is a great computational platform, right? So draw the differences for me between that versus an industry platform, and why is that important?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So let's step back a second, and let me take a concept called market networks. Okay, there's an excellent blog that NFX
Yeah.
has written about market networks. And what are market networks? Like, social networks bring people together for social interactions.
Yep.
Market networks bring service providers for the market interactions. So it could be a real estate agent working with a title and escrow company, with an inspector, with a mortgage broker. So if you look at industries are made up of a lot of service providers who are actually, in most industries, disaggregated, disconnected with their own tool sets. And what industry platforms can do is to bring the power of the cloud and the ability to integrate the service providers through APIs and create end-to-end workflows with standardized data, with systems of record, with the SaaS tools promoting each step in the workflow, so that the workflow gets conducted in a very reliable, trustworthy fashion across the chain of service providers. It's not just any single service provider being trustworthy, but the entire workflow happens in a platform. And that really changes the fluidity of how work gets done, and enables the digital transformation. And that's what's truly exciting about platform building. And now, when you do that, of course, you end up getting incredibly rich digital data, which you can now apply AI and automation techniques to make this workflow go smoother, more trusted, faster, and then spin a flywheel around it, create better experiences, create more traction and adoption, create better data, which feeds back into the automation of it. And that's really the exciting thing. And if you look at today's world in almost every industry, can take real estate, healthcare, any of these, the biggest challenge to making the next step change in those industries is the disintegrated nature of the ecosystem there. And that's what we can conquer with platforms.
That's amazing. And one nuance is actually a beautiful explanation, and I will check out, and I'll put that for the audience, the NFX blog around it. Um, so, is workflows more critical in these platforms, or is data more critical, or does it matter?
I think they are one and the same. At the end of the day, the workflows are driven by data being transmitted across service providers to enable the specific work to happen. Now, if you take a real estate transaction, there is a listing that is describing the property to be sold. That is actually being marketed. That is the listing that is then the foundation of an appraiser creating a valuation for the property. And then that's the data that will go into a title and escrow company and so on. So that kind of data needs to be transmitted, it needs to be augmented and all of that. Now, the question perhaps is the aggregation of that data in one place more important, or is it just the records being transmitted? I think the aggregation of data is what allows you to create incredibly efficient prompting, the accurate AI predictions, and maybe forecasts of what will happen, and so on. So both are important. So workflows are enabled by analytics. Workflows transmit data. You got to bring both together.
Awesome. That's amazing. That's a really good explanation. Let's talk AI, the industry. Where in the world is AI today in the industry? I mean, give me your, Joseph's view of the land, right?
Yeah, look, the more progress has happened in AI in the last 5 years than in the 50 years before that.
Yeah.
And it's just an exciting, absolutely exciting time for AI. So the biggest step change in AI in the last few years has been the emergence of self-supervised learning. Until recently, like our limitations were training data, annotated training data, so you could have supervised learning.
Yep.
Well, you could have reinforcement learning if you had a very good environment which would provide you feedback. But other than that, you really are at the mercy of that
Training data.
of training
Yep.
data. And self-supervised learning sort of took the lid off of that constraint. Um, it's sort of like operating in a room without a roof, like
Yeah.
the song "Happy." Right?
Yeah. I read that in your blog, the latest blog,
Yeah,
and we'll talk about that too. But go ahead.
that's right. That's right. And so the ability for large language models to go after all the data on the internet, whether it be code or image or text, of course, and in all languages, and then learn from the civilization's creativity. That has just been amazing. And what is actually great that came along with that is a fairly general purpose approach to learning from any type of data, including not just text data and image data, but even bioinformatic sequences. Like you can learn from known protein sequences. Now, there's AI that is generating proteins. And so those proteins are the substrate of life. And so if you can generate proteins, then, well, you could potentially revolutionize so much in not just healthcare, but environment and everything. And so that's what's super exciting about AI now, which is there are general tools available. They're able to learn from data that we were never able to tackle with AI before. And even more interestingly, these capabilities are showing emergent behavior, whether it's GPT-3 learning to code. Now you can specialize that and become Codex or GitHub Copilot or Replit.ai. Or now there is this startup called Adept.ai, founded by the inventors of the Transformer, who have just shown the ability to operate on software screens and websites and just converse with them in natural language and just do your work on a computer using AI. Those are all incredible, exciting, and I can only start to imagine what might come when we build upon these in the next 5 years.
That is awesome. So on the research and the innovation side of AI, definitely it's open. I mean, I love the we got into a room without a roof right now with self-supervised learning and the transformer models, and it kind of democratizes a lot of those approaches that were used by the large language models and now is available, like transfer learning, few shot learning, all those stuff too. Um, but where is the industry today? I mean, who is using it? Who's actually realizing value from this? And how do you see that play out? over the
Yeah,
next?
excellent question, Ganesh. And so it's so new. Industry is behind in the launch, right? Clearly, where you can use this is in areas that are extremely well digitized already. So I'm sure Google's using these capabilities in search, in YouTube,
Yep.
and a tremendous amount of this kind of work that will be done in video environments, whether it be TikTok or Netflix or any number of those things. I think that like ads definitely the areas which have already been highly digitized with high quality data, tremendous amount of organized unstructured data, they're all going to be the ones to benefit from very first. And the platforms that we already use, whether it be an iPhone or all of these things, will become dramatically more usable with these capabilities. But a few other interesting areas. I actually think content generation is going to be completely transformed, whether it be creating marketing or ad copy or new
Yeah.
videos, short clips. I think AI enables a content creator in very powerful ways, amplifies them, creates scale. So you'll have incredibly compelling content being created by large numbers of creators, and I can expect an order of magnitude change in marketing content creation. Now we may like it or not, but I think it empowers creative artists in tremendous ways. It empowers copywriters. And AI generated articles are going to be much more common. Even I used a tool for my own blog to make my writing a lot better, and that a tool called WriteSonic, which was a company started by a small number of young engineers playing around with GPT-3, right? And it's creative. So that's another area. What I think also in the next 5 to 10 years, I believe AI can really, really help in inventing new types of drugs and proteins. There were a couple of Nature articles recently from the David Baker Lab. I myself am on the board of a company called ABSI, which is using AI to develop antibodies and validate them. I think the dream of in silico drug discovery,
Hmm.
meaning purely computational drug discovery, as opposed to creating drugs in wetware labs. That dream is likely to come to fruition in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yep.
I could go on, and I mean, obviously, clinical trials is an area where AI could make a tremendous amount of difference in just making it faster, taking away the
Or
drudgery
efficient.
and the
Yeah.
heavy lifting associated with it. Innumerable applications like this.
That is awesome. No, it's interesting, and talking about the whole, and you wrote about this in your new Substack blog that you just started, and it's, for the audience, just if you want to hear about or hear Joseph's thoughts on a regular basis, go subscribe, go to Substack, and I'll put the thing in the show notes. You talked about an age of generative AI, the whole notion of content creation, right, from art to things. So one, I mean, this is primarily driven by the innovation coming again from the large language models, right? And it's now proliferating across multiple areas in this thing. I mean, even like including things like in silico drug discovery, right? So where you can actually, you can generate new structures of protein, match it against genes to see whether it's going to be any reactions that is positive in nature. Talk to me about that whole notion of what does this really mean for? I mean, we'll get to creatives in a second, but what does this age of generative AI really mean? Does it really mean that we don't have to do any of the drudgery that we did, so you can just have an AI just do the work for you in general? Uh, Maybe eventually, but we're not there yet. So talk to me about this age of generative AI, the room
Yeah,
without a roof.
yeah, happy to. Well, I think of it as the ability to learn from humanity's creativity. Okay, so that's a big statement, and let me explain what that means. A large language model can now learn from all the data on the internet and make surprising discoveries about how to code, given a natural language prompt, generate code. A large language model, or in fact, graph neural networks, can now be used to learn from databases of protein sequences and generate new proteins that don't even exist today that might be great antibodies or
Mm.
that might be great drug treatments. So you're basically learning from our scientific discoveries, curated in large data sets like protein sequences, and learning the patterns from it and generating new, right? And generating large number of candidates. You can learn from engineering designs that humanity have created and have generative engineering design, create new architectures, create new structural concepts, create new car bodies or shapes based upon what we have. So this ability to learn from what we already have and build something new at this scale, create something, generate something new, really didn't exist in a general enough way until now. Now
Mhm.
we've had, by the way, simulation capabilities in
Yep.
physics, right? When we can have in the world of science, where mathematical models could work, you could mathematically create simulated environments. Today, now we have an AI based environment to create not simulations. Now it's the next step. That's a generative AI, where mathematical models could not go. And so, in some ways, they maybe are side by side. You can have mathematical simulation and generative AI. They're sort of side by side. But this second capability amplifies existing human knowledge and existing human creativity in ways that only humans could do before. You had to be an expert in a particular field and then dream up new ways of creating some new protein or a new design or a new thing. And generative AI now amplifies that capability. That's what's exciting.
It's interesting, and I wrote some notes on some of these things. I mean, it's fascinating that with the world that we live in, but it raises the question: is you're really what you're doing is you're democratizing creativity or making creativity accessible. Well, I could be, as long as I know how to actually write code, be able to use and leverage some existing libraries and large language models. I could be the next Picasso, right? I mean, I could be the next, could be, right? There's a huge variation on this. Does that really mean when you play it out, you project it out, the only noble profession in the world is going to be software engineering or machine learning?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ganesh. Look, I think what has happened when technology has emerged is people who are already experts or are already very good become even more capable, right? You amplify everybody.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure that democratization means a great leveling at all.
Yep.
Reality is in the world, there is a Pareto of skills. People who are much higher in their skills will leverage these technologies even more and be, like Picasso squared, right? Or, Picasso to the power 10. And I think that is what the more likely outcome is. And in some ways, we may not like it, but what actually happens very often is the Pareto becomes steeper.
Hmm.
And what happens is talented people become even more productive, even more capable of creating magical things. And people who are dramatically less talented, even though they get more access to things that previously talented people could do, their abilities are still substantially differentiated because talent still matters. And that's true about not just AI but every technology.
No, it's the one thing that makes me sleep well about this topic, because like you, I've been in AI, and you always keep thinking about this. What does the future hold? Is I mean, like in historically, every time people complain when the steam engine was invented or the automobile was invented and stuff. There's all these function changes that happened that caused, definitely in the short run, a small part of the society get displaced, or they'll suddenly find themselves like, I'm not skilled enough to take advantage of those things. But given the fact that we're so early in this journey, right, what it also provides is an opportunity for smart entrepreneurs who to actually say, how do I make that accessible for everybody? And that could, that's like you got to get into the minds of people, how they think, right? I mean, obviously, there's going to be a part of the society that, or organizations. Like I just saw that I think Getty Images put out a statement yesterday or so, right? So it's the classic Kodak moment for
Yes.
in generative AI, right? So they're like, oh, you cannot upload any images that is generated by an AI. I'm like, the dumbest thing you can do right now, right? So rather than embrace it. So, but it's actually this whole. There is also the same debate that's happening, and there was this Colorado artist competition, a
Yes.
painting competition, where an AI generated art won the first prize, and everybody started getting an uproar. And I think it forces people to embrace technology. I mean, like it or not, right? I think that's the only thing that I would, call out is like, when we live in a world of individual choices and stuff, but you won't have a choice not to use technology as an individual or as an organization if you want to be competitive, right? If you're in the business of earning a living or making money, it's going to be almost imperative to actually use technology as a foundational platform to help amplify what you have, right? But truly enough, I think, just putting a bow on this topic or discussion is, like, AI is our opportunity to really amplify the human creativity. And like think about what you said, like learn from the best. I mean, today we can, imagine sitting down with Socrates and having a intellectual conversation, which is possible today. All you need is a large language model and run all the Socrates work on it, put a chatbot interface on it. Boom, you now have a conversation with Socrates if you want to, right? So that it opens up that window and the opportunity. And it's obviously going to be those who will embrace it are going to be more successful than the ones who reject it, right? Um, so,
And Ganesha, one thing to amplify that is what I have found is when I interact with Socrates or when I look at it, it the AI, generative AI, almost helps me think new thoughts. It actually stimulates my creativity as
yeah,
well.
for sure.
And yeah, no, so maybe there is a tool here that is an assistant for your creative mind. I said generative AI is the rocket ship of human creativity. And I think it really is true. It actually amplifies your own ability to be creative.
Yeah.
And as you've seen in Stable Diffusion, when Stable
Yep.
Diffusion came out, in the span of a month, you think about the incredible amount of creativity that it spurred on art and even video
Yeah.
generation and all the Twitter thread. It just stimulated so many people, and I think that stimulative effect is there as well.
No, I have my Google Colab open with the Stable Diffusion thing. I'm trying to,
Right.
it's amazing what it really opens up. And, coming, one of the things, like, AI and automation has this opportunity to really elevate the human condition, right? Which is like, I don't want to go worry about paying bills and getting on websites and shopping things. I want to think about something, ask somebody to do it, and have that thing to go do it. But human resources are expensive. So
Right.
that's where technology comes in, and you can almost everybody should have a Jarvis suit around them, for to autonomize their life. I mean,
Right.
that's the big goal, and that's the opportunity with AI. Now, two other topics on that same note. One is a lot of hype here, a lot of things that are future, a lot of things in research, and trickle down effects happen into production and into actual platforms and use cases in industry. When you look at the market today and say what's hype, what's real, what is still not possible, what are some of those things that people will sell you snake oil on, and what's real, what's not real, where is the industry actually at today? A lot of innovation on the one last thing I'd say on that is, like, I had our friend, I think probably a mutual friend, Gurdeep Paul, on the show
Mhm.
last week.
Mhm.
And he made a statement in the show, was like, hey, I think AI has been primarily run by academics and researchers, at least over the last 5 to 6 years, right? I mean, debate it or not, but it's more from a perspective of saying it's what that translates to is people or organizations that can afford to have deep researchers get the benefit of actually doing it. Obviously, you talked about creating the pools of data and the quality data. So who have been digitally in the forefront, digitally native companies, they have the ability. And you took the examples too. But and then there's the rest of the market, right? So for them especially, right, what is real, what is attainable, and what is not today, right? Give us a view of that.
Yeah. No, it's an excellent question. Look, I think I'm reminded of the statement: the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. Right.
For sure. Gibson.
I think the distribution problem of AI in terms of accessibility for the vast majority of enterprises is a big challenge. Now, if I may tell a story, I was reminded that very early on in the 20th century, when electric motors were first invented, there's this big effort in manufacturing where people went ahead and said, okay, how shall we harness electricity for manufacturing? And they evaluated electric motors against what they had at the time, which was these steam engines where there's incredibly long crankshafts that ran through the factory, and other small machines running with pulleys and belts connected to the crankshaft and so on. And when they evaluated the new electric machines against that, they found that it was more efficient for them to run with the steam engine, and it actually was cheaper, and retooling it would be extremely expensive. Most manufacturing companies could not find any advantage whatsoever in switching from a steam engine to electricity at the time.
Yeah.
But guess what happened in the next 20 years? In the next 20 years, every company that stuck with the steam engine died. There was like the biggest sort of mass extinction in manufacturing ever.
Yeah.
And what turned out was that electric motors had this incredible ability to be very small and in every machine locally with its own locally tuned characteristics, and with just a central distribution of electricity instead of central distribution of power through a crankshaft, you could actually control lots of machines and optimize the manufacturing workflows and the flow of goods and so on. And it changed the efficiency of manufacturing in such profound ways that people could not actually address in that initial study of, hey, is steam engine more efficient than an electric motor, right? Because that was a very narrow view.
Yeah.
Something very similar happens in today's world. AI brings power in ways similar to the electric motor. And when you look at it at the macro scale of, hey, is AI going to allow me to do healthcare better than just doing software, SaaS tools with rule-based systems? Well, you'll find it hard to create an argument why AI is better. But when you actually put AI into production in the early 20th century manufacturing companies, you find untold new ways of creating outcomes that are dramatically more impactful and more efficient. I think that is the opportunity and the challenge of this time.
Absolutely. I love that. AI has a distribution problem, not an innovation problem, for sure.
Correct.
And I love the way you framed it, right? And absolutely, AI is the electric motor of the 1920s. And I think what it does is, I mean, like, just amplifying that point you made, is that, like, and you got to get to a point, like today nobody talks about electric motors. I mean, of course it took 80 years, but then the compounding effect of technology and where we are, I mean, things have, the telephone took 50 years to get into 50 million households. Angry Birds took like 7 days, something like that, right? So
That's right.
the compounding effect of technology goes on. But I think what I see personally, from my vantage point, when we actually think about it, it's like AI is going to become more invisible. So we won't talk about AI 10 years from now, right?
Right.
It's going to be a fabric of computing or computational thinking, or even generation of ideas and content that's going to be under the surface and embedded in all the different processes and things that we do. It's going to be a fascinating future for sure.
Yeah, completely agree, Ganesh. I mean, today we don't think about microcontrollers as being in pretty much every device, or DSP, right? Digital signal processing is another example of a technology sort of similar to AI, and it's there everywhere. I mean, in our microphones, in every place, and we don't think about it. So AI will totally be invisible in many, many applications, and it won't be. It's another technology at the end of the day. It's not truly artificial intelligence, right? And I don't think of it as artificial intelligence, really, although we use the term AI quite a bit.
Yeah, it's nothing artificial about it.
There's
It's
nothing
just like
artificial about it.
it's augmenting your intelligence at best, right? So I
That's
think
right.
no, it's fascinating. Now, so how can organizations really embed that as a core in their transformation journeys? Maybe you start off talking a little bit about, and I think your Compass experience is amazing, right? From that, but I'm sure you were at Microsoft when the company was transforming, and how you're thinking about it too. And I'm sure you worked with many companies, organizations, and stuff. So lay out some characteristics of organizations that you've seen that have successfully navigated a transformation journey, number one, and then then go into what should the rest of the world do. How do you bridge that distribution gap for the industry, right?
Yeah, very interesting question. I don't think I have all the answers, but I can draw parallels. Take a look at the IT revolution or the cloud computing revolution. It's actually in many ways potentially similar, right? How are enterprises now adopting the cloud and SaaS services and going on a transformation away from data centers and being centered on them? Again, you can see industries and enterprises at different levels of maturity in adopting cloud computing and SaaS. And the same way you will see different levels of maturity in adopting AI. And I think the characteristics of those companies are uh, a few innovators in those companies who see the future, who get the championship of the executives, who then are able to take specific areas and apply these capabilities and build organizations and show success in that, and then bootstrap off of that and show the transformations capable, just like electric motors change manufacturing plants. How do you change something like that? I think the ability to bet, for executives to bet on a few very practical innovators in their companies and give them the funding and the ability to go build out those things in specific areas and take companies to the future. I think that is what's most important in existing companies. And if it's not an existing company, I mean, in pretty much every area, I think we will see a new breed of startups, most likely SaaS startups, which actually embed AI deeply and create that next generation market network in every industry, who will now disrupt existing companies. And those disruptions will either really change the company. I mean, like have a company go out of business and be replaced, or those disruptive companies will be acquired. By the way, even though it's not in the phase of AI, one really interesting example to talk about is Adobe acquiring Figma. And
Figma.
Figma came out of nowhere, and my own team at Compass used Figma, and it was an incredible, delightful,
Great.
collaborative tool. And we did not see like Adobe, InDesign, or others as that future, right? So we bet on Figma, and Adobe just paid 20, or rather,
20 billion. Yeah.
yeah, 20 billion, right, is the price for they quoted for Figma. And that's an example. And there'll be more such examples, but AI enabled.
Interesting. That is awesome. So, a few things on that, like the Figma story is incredible, and to know, I actually did a deep dive trying to understand Figma as a company, and realized they founded the company in 2011. They
Right.
did a private beta and then an extended beta. They didn't make any money until they were $1 million in revenue in 2017, right?
Yes.
And then they went to million to 4.5 million to something like 10 or 12 million to 70 to they closed 2021 at 100 and something, 100 million, 112 million, and they're on track to do 400 plus million in 2022.
Yeah.
Just
And they may
incredible, right?
approach they may
Right?
approach a billion next year, right? And I think
That's
the hockey stick is just incredible.
incredible. So I mean, there's a lot of lessons there in company building and the long run and things like that too. But I think it's fascinating what you just said, right? Which is like, how do you really look at ways to, I mean, you're either going to disrupt the industry or you're going to get disrupted, right? There's no well, there's the happy path, which is you try to be the disruptor and you at least will stay alive if you're successful in at least half of what you're trying to do. One of the things that we often hear is the challenges around transformations and driving large scale transformations in companies is less about technology. It's more about people, processes. How do you get everybody? I know you talked about that, drawing paddles, telling stories, convincing people to go do it. But what kind of organizational structure or uh, um, even processes, if you will, in your experience, will be largely beneficial for driving a large scale transformation? Right? How do you move a 800-pound gorilla, you know, which is tied to their particular way of doing business. And now you're saying I got new technology that I'm going to whitewash all over you.
It's a great question. It reminds me of a quote from Thomas Kuhn, who was one of the incredible innovators on the history of science, and he had this quote, provocative one, which said, "Old scientists never change their minds; they just die." It's it's an interesting thing to think about sometimes, which is sometimes extremely established, successful business models. Okay,
Hmm.
I'm necessarily saying it's our mindset. Extremely successful business models. It's just very difficult for that business model to transform itself. It was very difficult for Polaroid and Kodak and all of those companies, because the type of innovation that is coming at you from a digital camera or a digital camera embedded in iPhone is so different and so alien in many ways that it's just very difficult to incrementally transform yourself into that space.
Yep.
So, what very successful companies have done in this area is to create entirely new subsidiaries that are actually going after something very disruptive. When Amazon went after creating AWS, or when Google acquired YouTube, or when Microsoft acquired Minecraft, or went into GitHub. I mean, so companies have ended up creating either on their own subsidiaries that are very focused on disruption, so that there is a group of people there who are thinking in that new model and building out in that new model, versus being tasked also with the incredible human challenge of convincing an established business model and all of the infrastructure, supporting infrastructure around it, to change and shift to something new. And remember, when you think about an established business, it's not just the people who are operating the business, it's finance partners and people who quantify future cash flows, and analysts who are looking at the business externally. And there's so much gravity around a particular established enterprise that sometimes that transformation is incredibly heavy. I mean, I'm not saying that we should give up on transforming existing business. It's just that the challenge is just very, very heavy. So sometimes you really have to create pods that are incubated to create success in a new way of operating, a new way of thinking.
That is awesome. What's it's very clear advice. Shifting gears, if you're a kid coming out of college right now and you see the world changing in front of you, the age of generative AI and automation is upon us and stuff. Uh, where do we start? Where do they start? What do you recommend?
I think you start by just being a super tinkerer. All right. I think you tinker. You really learn by doing. You play in the field, and that I think is super important. I think my biggest advice to people are, don't hesitate to be very, very resourceful, very oriented towards tinkering. I think the uh, the rate at which you experiment is what is going to actually drive your rate of progress and innovation. And also, there's a famous saying by I think the former head of MIT Media Lab, that the rate of, if you want to increase the rate of innovation, you have to reduce the cost of failure. Meaning, you want to be able to try a tremendous amount without the failure of experiments really hurting you too badly. And so set up environments where you can experiment, you can fail fast, you can try new things, and move forward. And if you're coming out of college, I want you to engage incredible tools like Colab and open source, and of course play around with things like Stable Diffusion as they come out. In tinker, experiment, and learn.
Tinker, experiment, and learn. Golden words. No, I totally agree. And I think, one of the things that in this revolution powered by AI and data and the omnipresence of data and stuff, is that you don't necessarily have to be just a data scientist or a machine learning engineer to be successful, right? If you're a creative, just go deeper into it. Just embrace technology. Make that part of your fabric. Put on that Jarvis suit, right? Or build your own Jarvis suit, right? And I love the way, independent of all of that, just optimize for learning and optimize for fast. And then you learn by experimenting, you learn by failing, and by feedback. And so optimize for an environment. I love that quote you said, reduce the cost of failure. That's the way you do it.
Right. Reduce the cost of
Joseph, this
failure.
has been amazing. Great conversation. I really, really, totally enjoyed it. Um, where can the viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
Follow my Substack. It's called Generative AI. It's on my LinkedIn page. It's LinkedIn,
Perfect.
Generative Artificial Intelligence. And yeah, I'm very happy to interact with everyone on LinkedIn or otherwise and
Awesome.
provide advice.
That's awesome. Joseph, this was a fascinating conversation. I really learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will as well. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Ganesh, thank you for hosting. It's been a true pleasure.